Well, we see if anybody else is going to join us. I'm Lyn Roberts from Square Books, and this is one of our virtual events, and I want to let you know about some upcoming virtual events that we have as well. So on Monday, August 3rd at 5 p.m., we have James Bird, Jess Redmond, and Gilbert Ford, and they will be talking about their new middle grade books. So it's a middle grade extravaganza, and like all Square Books Junior events, it promises to be a lot of fun. On next Wednesday, August 5th, Natasha Trethaway will be in conversation with Ralph Eubanks about her new book, Memorial Drive. That'll be 5:30 on Wednesday, August 5th. We do have signed editions. It's an amazing book. We're really looking forward to this conversation. And Ralph is just so sharp, and it's going to be extraordinary. All of our events are on Zoom now, and you must RSVP for the code to get into the room. So just send that to rsvp@squarebooks.com. Then I'm going to skip ahead for a couple of events because we've started this book group called Crossroads Book Group following the murder of George Floyd and all the events in our sort of national conversation around that. We wanted to be part of that in the way that we are with books and conversations about books. So we've started the series. We're going to do one a month. We did this month's was Barbara Phillips and Susan Glisson, and they talked about Natasha Trethaway's book of poems, Native Guard. This coming event will be Dr. E.J. Edney, and he's a professor at the University of Mississippi, and Ruth Odell, who's with the League of Women Voters, and they will be discussing how to be an anti-racist. And that'll be on August 11th at 5:30. Again, it's at Central Time. It is an RSVP event. And for all the Crossroads books, we are offering a 15% discount because we're really just trying to continue our conversation and not really, this is not really a for-profit thing, but this is the way that we know how to participate is with books. So I think everybody, I hope, is with us, and we're so excited to have Odie Lindsey here with us today. Odie, just a little bit of background. He received his MFA from Art Institute of Chicago, and that was sort of okay. But then he came to the University of Mississippi and got his master's in Southern Studies. And, suddenly he became a brilliant writer after that. I don't know how that happened, but, it's the magic. And also he is an alumnus of Square Books. So I think that we are largely responsible for shaping him at the University of Mississippi at the Center for the Study of Southern Culture and Square Books. He's gone on to have an NEA fellowship to the Virginia Center for Creative Arts, and he's currently teaching in the Department of Medicine, Health, and Society at Vanderbilt University, which I'd like to hear more about later, perhaps. He has a collection of short stories, We Come to Our Senses, and, of course, he is one of the co-editors of the Mississippi Encyclopedia. And so now he has released his debut novel, Some Go Home, and it is published by Norton. And we do have these lovely, he has signed book plates for us that says Odie Lindsey, just in case you were wondering. We're so grateful to Norton for allowing Odie to join us, and to Odie for joining us today. Thank you, Odie, and welcome to Virtual Square Books.
Thank you, Lyn. I'm so grateful to be with you. This is a good crew of faces. That baby was intimidating. but I know her, so I know she would be gentle to me. Thanks for everyone. It's so good to see it. It's good to see. Hi to our non-video participants. Wise move also. I was thinking earlier, Lyn, about when I went to apply to work at Square Books, and I think it applies to my novel because you all have this list of works that you're supposed to identify, so Southern works of literature and non-Southern works, and then there's sort of a comment thing. And I remember that I didn't get that many of them right. I was thinking I need to come up with some trait, and I believe the comment basically said that I'm not I'm sort of approximate in some of these titles, but I am as loyal as a Labrador. And I think that is how I feel now. I'm sort of approximate about some of the facts and things that go into this, but I'll do my best to describe it. And I am so grateful that you all have had me here. It's good to see you. Oh, I can.
I'm sorry. There we go. Unmuted. We were talking just before everyone arrived about how with the Zoom world, we've all got a little bit more relaxed about technical difficulties. So there we go. That was the first one. So Odie, would you like to begin this by telling us a little bit about the novel and maybe reading a little bit from it?
That'd be fantastic. Yeah, I could. So the novel, I think, is as much about maybe place as it is character, and it's set in a small fictional North Mississippi town called Pitchlynn. And the lead character is a woman named Colleen. She is 4 to 5 years removed from a deployment to Iraq, and she's married, newly pregnant. She is starting a family, but you get the sense early on that she's been trying to outrun some trauma rather than deal with it. And at the start of the book, what really opens it up is that we find out that her elderly father-in-law is going to be retried for a civil rights era murder. And with this, the story really blossoms to sort of not only does Colleen sort of past trauma, the things she's been running away from, starts to unfold, but we get various characters across really 4 decades, different relationships to this murder begin to unfold. And I think the book is largely about the difficulty, not just of Colleen, for Colleen to look back, but for everyone to sort of look back and reckon with their relationship to trauma, and how difficult that can be, in particular, if you want to try to move forward, which I think everyone here, most of the folks here would like to do. That's a long bit. I only worked on this for a decade, but that's as best I've got. But I do want to read a little bit, actually, from a little bit of Colleen's sort of backstory, and I think it's important because one thing when home, she comes back to her hometown, and she. She's been deployed overseas. She comes back. She really goes off the deep end, which unfortunately is sort of happens to way too many soldiers who come home. And after a time of not being good to her body and to herself and her other relationships, she has a friend, a confidant named Dina, who encourages her to pursue another role that's available there. And so she's decides, or maybe is sort of coerced into tackling this new post-war occupation or vocation. So I'll read just a couple minutes. The summer sun slapped her, belted her, bronzed her, blazed. She was bloated. She was on her period and felt like a bloated maraschino under a cafeteria lamp, a buffed up pickled cherry atop a box pudding pie. The Corvette she rode in on, a 67 convertible 427 cubic with rally red paint, didn't have a back seat. So Colleen's ass was plopped on the metal of the trunk, her high heels dimpling a folding dish towel on the shotgun seat leather. It was oven hot June, her pantyhose constricted and the sash sawed at her neck. There were American flags of various sizes in hands and on lamp posts and picketed into the ground. Colleen waved at the crowd and they all waved back, lap after lap. The vet cruised around town square as the aroma of cotton candy and hot funnel cake wafting. Dina had ordered Colleen not to touch her face or her makeup, but rather Colleen had to fan it with only her fingertips. Her dress was short and shiny, made of spangles, felt shrink-wrapped. Laps and laps around Courthouse Square, past strawberry kiosks and strawberry hats and white paper plates of real strawberries dolloped with Cool Whip. The banner above was the same from years past, proclaiming the annual Strawberry Festival. Colleen had no idea if they even grew strawberries on a commercial level in Pitchlynn, Mississippi, but she was positive that these berries had come from somewhere else, given that nobody's garden ever produced any after April. There were Mexicans in town now. Maybe not Mexicans, but Colleen believed them to be Mexicans. Their children spoke with redneck accent. They were nice enough folks. Save for the church or the store, they pretty much kept to themselves. Though here they loitered in groups at the edge of the crowd, round and round they came, in jean shorts and t-shirts and their own American flags. And whenever the car idled, the hot exhaust caked up in the still air, the driver had to keep the vet moving, Colleen thought, crawling along. He has got to keep up the breeze. At every lap of the square, she looked for Dina, her friend Dina, who chatted folks up, bragging, probably on behalf of the beauty shop's ringer contestant. She circled the white pillared courthouse at the center of the square. Folks were gathered by the Confederate statue, the white marble soldier who'd stood attention with rifle facing south. She'd seen him all their life. They all had. And Colleen figured she'd won the pageant because she was a veteran. She hated that she was a veteran. She was proud and guilty and confused by being a veteran. She so wanted these folks to understand what it was like, and yet knowing they never would, and that maybe she never would, she wished she'd signed up to extend her tour, had at least re-upped to Germany or Korea or anywhere else forever. A veteran, a woman, a Southerner, high school grad, a number of things, and now the strawberry maiden of Pitchlynn, Mississippi. All right.
Okay. Okay, yes, here we go again. Maybe I won't mute myself anymore. Y'all just be at risk. Wow, that was great. Thank you so much. I love that scene, and it's such a great description. And I think we've all kind of, I mean, I can imagine that on the square in Oxford, which brings us to your town, Pitchlynn, Mississippi. Which is, I should say that there are a number of, Colleen is really your main character, but then you have some other like very significant characters in there as well. And it's very rich with characters, and they're all interconnected, which again is something we're kind of familiar with in this small town Mississippi setting. So is Pitchlynn, Mississippi based on any one place or an amalgamation of places?
It's definitely an amalgamation. I think, you know, any given number of towns around there, you might, they would lend themselves to different, you know, architecture, a different house or a different landscape, different drive. And I think also when I was there, it was interesting because I moved back south from Chicago. And so I had this you know, this lens, I think, where I was driving through and everything was so bright and so particular. And so I would just take these snapshots. But at the time when I was there, it was funny because you certainly had Oxford in the immediate vicinity and all the wonderful sort of just the gift of different people and sometimes different tensions there. But you would drive to Holly Springs and see these sort of antebellum craft houses, see Rust College, or see Graceland too, this pink, or whether it was baby blue or whatever it was painted like in juxtaposition. And I remember at the time also in Water Valley, there was this great debate about whether or not to have alcohol sales. And so the neighbors there were really, as you can imagine, just up at each other between yard signs, but just conversations or newspapers. Anywhere that you would go, there were these sort of small dramas or small gifts or small images that on their own are extraordinary, maybe for me, needed to be there, but in order to really make drama out of place. And I think Pitchlynn is this place that's that it needed all of those to come together. I also made maps of things, or I would draw streets, or I would make sketches of parks and that kind of thing.
Okay. Well, it really it is a sort of a microcosm, and everyone is so interconnected and sort of have this shared past, maybe like previous generations. There is a builder who comes who inherits this sort of the famous mansion in town, which has a sort of a racist history, and but it's the tourism spot that everyone goes to see this amazing magnolia tree and the house. And he's coming from Chicago, and his wife was part of the scene. And then there's some racial history also connected to the house. There's a lot kind of that surrounds this house that is significant. I mean, it's almost actually like this house is a character in the story. Maybe also like it's a monument, like our statue on the square.
And I definitely wanted it to be, and I say this in the presence of historians who I see, and they will hopefully forgive me. I feel at times like I'm a walking sort of generalist and an asterisk, and that is that the drama really, I think, sort of takes over, but I wanted to see it as a monument, and I wanted to see it as the site of memorial, the site of trauma, the site that to some people was valuable, the site that, again, everyone in relationship to it has a different approach to what it is and what it means to them and what it can be. And as for the Chicago sort of property flipper who comes to Mississippi, he was the original protagonist of the novel. I remember walking around and I thought about this fish out of water story about someone who might inherit this property, in particular a property flipper in sort of gentrifying Chicago, and come down with a child, a young widower, and try to not only slot into that history, but also raise a child in this small community without having to necessarily invest in what that property meant. And that still is a big part of the story. And I hope it links this notion of land and identity and trauma, or quote unquote value, to different people beyond the town itself, to Chicago, to elsewhere. I'm not, I went from Oxford to Austin, and certainly have been back in Nashville and that, and this notion of land, property, value, what that means to different people, how it can be erased, or how we might position it in certain ways. That's certainly not unique to a small town in Mississippi. So that house really does come to embody this site of trauma, this site of ambition for some, for others, a site of sort of vengefulness. The Chicago guy whose wife has passed away, and who the town sort of claims ownership of this house. He wants to redefine it. He wants to sort of destroy it in a way, out of his hurt maybe, and out of his sort of spite for the place. So yeah, place becomes this really important connector of these folks.
Mm-hmm. Well, and there's also class and the Southern social structure and racial history as well. So there's like this sort of Byron de la Beckwith character who's connected. He's lower class, but he's connected with this family that owned this big mansion, and his history and his past, and he is he's being retried, I guess, in the story. So, and we go back and we see how that's all connected to the past. So nothing really nothing is ever really fixed.
Well, it definitely brings up this idea that that whether one person wants to sort of repaint and restructure this house, whether another wants to restore it to its glory, whether another might be assisting some of that process because he's not sure what his relationship is to that place, whether it's some voices that maybe were shut out there. It is about the inability to outrun this past, about having to reckon with it, and all of these people's different relationship to that reckoning, including folks who weren't ever given the chance to maybe make a decision on how that was going to go anyway. And not to mention the fact that the house itself actually has been moved into town. It was a farmhouse outside of town. So it came into town in 1965. It wasn't as if it was there for an extraordinary amount of time. Its own history and its own relationship to actual physical spaces, even sort of in flux. But yeah, I think place, land, the way that we want to sort of participate or be bound to it is really in question here. And it does bring everybody together. And to get back, forgive me, I'm because I'm excited to be with you. But this notion of class certainly undergirds all of it. There's a recurrent episodes of sort of class and race and how those tensions, those sort of intersections will come together and sort of repeat themselves generationally here. Folks who are kind of presented with a choice, for lack of a better term, in terms of how they want to side, whether class, race, or some version of the two, will bring them together, sort of drive them apart.
Mm-hmm. And you do write from many different points of view, class and race and gender and a little bit different time periods as well. How did how many points of view are there, and how did you keep everything sort of straight? And because it reads like a real story, and that these people are really telling their stories.
The answer to points of view, too many. I don't ever want to do that again.
It works.
But I really, I think one sort of conceptual approach that I wanted to get in, that certainly I'm not the first, but I always love books that will host different perspective. I have since I was a kid. I wasn't a great reader as a child, but I loved Spoon River, Weinsberg, this sort of way that you got this cumulative truth, this sort of mosaic truth. And I think later on, so many authors that I've been drawn to, from Jennifer Egan to Toni Morrison or Bolaño and other folks. I mean, that cumulative truth is wonderful, and I almost felt like fitting that jigsaw puzzle. It wasn't always the most immediate plot, but I really enjoyed it. So that was part of it. The other thing was I didn't want to be, as best I could, I didn't want to have a one-liner. And when I think, as we're all, maybe most of us are familiar, if not all of us, I mean, all too often you think about the South or Southern storytelling or a place or race or class, and it's sort of this one-liner. And in particular, forgive me, I say this with love, like I found that in Mississippi, it's such a complex place, but it becomes a one-liner. And I really thought that with different points of view and different sort of trying to weave in small histories or like that it would hopefully elevated above that as the story progressed, in the very practical sense, because two of my best gigs were working at Square Books, and the other was working on the Mississippi Encyclopedia, which was going on as I'm writing this work of fiction. I just, you get this phenomenal scholarship from these people, and I'm around these incredible historians who are teaching me, and how can I not put that in there? How can I not put that in there? And that also contributed to really what I wanted to do in terms of a cumulative story and a really giving a sort of history of a town and people and this event.
Mm-hmm. Well, you were very successful. I mean, it was really masterful, and with that many points of view, it could have been you know, in the hands of someone less skilled, it might not have worked, but it did. So if y'all have not read the book, don't be scared by us talking about this, because it really all comes together and makes great sense, and sort of gives you the big picture of all of that. Now, Colleen, who ended up being your main character, she was in your collection of short stories. So you wrote a short story about her, and so how did she survive to this, or did the short story come after you'd started the novel, or what's her connection?
The short story came before. She shoved her way in. The short story came before, and just, you can already tell that I'm just going to talk. But too much information. You know, I deployed to the first Gulf War, and I come back, and I never was able to write about it because I couldn't reconcile sort of what was a successful war with how I was feeling about it. It was sort of uneasy, and it was with the short stories, with the current Iraq War, which has been, 20 years basically now, or the better part. I started thinking about it and thinking about different bodies and different viewpoints and people with whom I'd served, and out of that character, Colleen. And I knew what my experience was like, but I thought, what would another 19-year-old or 20-year-old, what would their experience be like? So started sort of a sketch and just kind of an exercise, and then it turned into one short story, and then it turned into 3 vignettes that were connected, and then the story collection came out, and I had started this novel, and it was about the Chicago property flipper raises a small child in small town Mississippi, and I couldn't stop thinking about Colleen. I couldn't stop thinking, well, she's around there somewhere. What's going to happen to her? Is she going to be okay? Who's she going to be in 5 years? Is she going to settle in? Will she become healthy? Will she skip town? And I just was more and more and more, in particular, I try to write away from her, right towards these other narratives of this town. And she was there. And at some point, years into it, to the manuscript, I decided I cut 30,000 words and reconfigured everything around telling her story. And I thought, she's got to be the one that sort of drives this thing forward. So I couldn't not tell about her, basically.
Mm-hmm. And so is that where the title comes from? Some go home, but it's also sort of the Thomas Wolfe thing that you can't ever really go home.
It's a combination. I always had working manuscript titles, and one of them was Lapse, because I thought people were going in Lapse, and one of them was something else. And so it had to do with initially this inability to kind of move forward which again, everybody in this town is trying to find a way forward, and they need to reconcile with their relationship to the past. So some go home, and yeah, it had the echo of Thomas Wolfe, but really, to be honest, there's a 1970 Jerry Jeff Walker album cut, this Texas guy, and I spent my childhood down there, and it has taken on such different meaning for me. When I came back from the Gulf War in '92, this old song that I'd heard as a kid came on, and it opens up with this lyric, soldier. It's about a soldier coming back to Tennessee, and I thought, oh, this is my song. And I listened to it, and I thought it was my thing. But years later, when I was listening, really thinking about it and thinking about this book, there's a lyric that says, she's headed home, back where life begins and ends, and they feel that you belong to them. And I thought, wow, so it was about this young woman going home, and where everybody decides who you are and who you're going to be and where you slot in. I'm being dramatic, of course, but essentially that lyric just stuck with me. So somewhere between the Wolf, but that particular lyric and even my personal experience sort of came together, and I said, okay, that's got to be the title of it.
Wow. Well, so that reminded you made a playlist for your first book. Now, have you made a playlist for the novel?
I did, yeah. And over at Large Hearted Boy, which is such a, he's been running the site for years and gives so many of us chances to make these playlists. And in this case, I had, I think it'll be out in about a week. And it's really hard. I mean, it's hard to pick songs that, to narrow it down. The first one, I think I had 20. And then the other day I picked maybe 10. After I'd sent it, I saw someone had 100 songs straight up. They just said, I want 100. But yeah, in this case, I wanted to I have some Mississippi tunes. I have some Mississippi to Chicago songs, Tyrone Davis. I have also, but some songs. I wrote this book while I was traveling around. I've spent some time in Italy and some time in Spain and some time in Morocco. So I put some tunes that I had heard in those 3 spaces on there as well, and some go home. It actually was made both lists. That's how much it's sort of taken shape for me over the years. So yeah, that'll be out I think next week. That was really cool.
All right. Well, let us know when it is, and we'll post it and direct everyone to Large Hearted Boy.
Yeah, that's the name of it.
Check it out.
Yeah, some beautiful work there. Thank you.
And so does music influence your writing and the way you think about things?
Absolutely. I think that was sort of my primary lesson. I mean, there's in addition to mentioning of Jerry Jeff Walker as being a kid, I was in San Antonio in the 70s and had parents that lived closer to, my dad lived closer to Austin. So I think down there at that time, it was just such a robust collection between Tejano bands in San Antonio, between all those bands in Austin, Willie and Waylon. That was my first sort of narrative. Those were my first. I knew lyrics before I knew anything else. And I said before, I mean, that was my vehicle. I worked in music for a while. I played music for a while, and I had wonderful long hair for a moment. Played in a terrible band around here. But really, at the end of the day, it came down to those narratives, I think, really inform, hopefully, the way I write and the way I listen and hear writing grammatically. I shouldn't say this because I'm teaching. I would be hard pressed to diagram a sentence, but I think just the how a sentence sounds and how a paragraph sounds and that kind of thing is definitely a result of that my first discipline, as it were. Which I think is music.
Well, and plus, while you were studying at the Center for the Study of Southern Culture and probably editing the Mississippi Encyclopedia, you had so much chance to really sort of examine Mississippi and the South under a microscope, and that must have been really invaluable for you while you were writing.
Extraordinary. Yeah, extraordinary. I mean, it was a tremendous experience to first come out of the Art Institute of Chicago in terms of craft and sentence making and all this. But I remember a couple of different things. But one, I was teaching an adjunct job at Loyola University in Chicago, and I taught a short story, and it was set in the South. And someone asked me, I said, "Oh, well, here's the point of view, and here's this." And then they asked me, "Well, why is that character?" I know it was Dry September, Faulkner's story. Why is that character so mad? And why do these men act this way? And I had no idea how to answer it. And that sort of sent me down a path of, well, I need to figure out those questions that have to do with myself and where I'm from and my family and this community. So to come down here and to Oxford, I'm wanting to be there now, to have that resource was just extraordinary. I mean, it was just the best thing in terms of fiction writing. It enabled me to explore topics that I'm still trying to figure out. I mean, I'm always trying to punch above my weight, and I think it helped me try and do that. Yeah, what a gift. What a gift.
Well, does anyone have any questions out there? If you have any questions, if you just want to type them in the little chat box, and we'll see if anybody takes up on that.
And
Charles, Sammy, can we unmute Charles Wilson? Is that possible?
I also wanted to say, while we're unmuting, one thing that was my first job in Nashville out of college. All I wanted in life was to work at Capricorn Records, which was at the time here in Nashville. So I moved here, and I'm thinking about music still. And I said, I'll work for free. And they said, you can't work for free. We can't legally. And I said, okay, I'll go pay for a class so that I can work for free. And they said, yeah. So I finally got them to let me in the door. And I said, what do you need me to do? And they said, well, we're working with this little record label. And we don't know if it's a fit or not. They're called Fat Possum. We don't know what the hell they're doing. But just go sit in the corner with all that stuff and listen to it and try to figure it out. So that was also part of the equation, I think, of music, and also, my relationship with Mississippi and Oxford. And that.
All right. Charles Wilson.
Welcome back, Odie, to Oxford, at least virtually.
Yes.
We wish you were here, but we look forward to your being back again sometime and us enjoying your presence. But it's good to see you, and congratulations on the book.
Thank you so much.
My question is, did you have an epiphany about this book? Were you sitting in Ajax having a squash casserole, for example, and it hit you, this is the book I want to write? You have so many elements also. I mentioned the autobiographical aspect. You always wonder about fiction writers and speculate about this. And they're there, the war, influence of the war. Obviously, Colleen is a character that grows out of that. Small town Mississippi. The music, glad you mentioned Jerry Jeff Walker from Austin. But can you reflect a little bit about how you got the idea or the inspiration to do this? Was it a moment like that, or was it just a slow accretion and coming out of your short stories, maybe?
No, thanks for asking, Charles. I sure wish I was there, and I know we'll huddle up soon. It really was more. It was more of a constellation. I mean, it really was a constellation of points similar to the music thing, the Jerry Jeff or the Fat Possum or this or that, or going to, in the late 90s, I would drive up and go to the Turner's house, or these little things that came together. I think one was I was walking one day in Oxford and again, thinking about a changing town and thinking about a town in Chicago where I lived that was changing, and Nashville that was changing, and all this was changing. And I saw someone walking with a small child, and I said, well, what if that person wasn't here? So that was what sort of started it. And then again, Colleen sort of shoving herself into this narrative and not being done with her. That may have been it was the biggest epiphany, if only because, again, I had spent years working on this thing without her. And it really struck me, look, she's not going to go away. And you don't want to do the work to put her in here. But if you don't do it, you're not going to be able to finish or tell this story. And so making that decision, I think maybe was the biggest one. Just to make the decision start again, as everyone does. But it's a damned hard one to make sometimes.
Okay.
Yay.
Andrea, did you have a question?
Well, I was just doing the Hook 'em Horn song.
I thought that was a wave of hands.
Well, it's a hook 'em, but hello, Odie, congratulations. And that was a fabulous review in Garden and Gone, and I'm so excited for you.
Thank you so much. I'm really
Yes, and I purchased my book from Book People here in Austin, but I'm moving to Laurel, Mississippi.
All right.
Yeah. So we're going to have to get together.
I can't wait. I can't wait. Thank you. Glad to see you.
Okay. Yeah, Book People they're good friends of ours, but when you're in Laurel, I think we'll be your closest bookstore. So
that's right.
Come see us at Square Books.
That's exactly right.
Kelly has a question. She says, I'm curious to hear about an example of something you learned while working on the Mississippi Encyclopedia that made it into the novel.
I learned a big answer is I learned so much, if only because, again, I was working on the encyclopedia, and every day almost you would get work from a scholar who was amazing at this, and my job was to sort of just look at it, try to clean it up, and hopefully help the process along. So whether sometimes that would be a type of architecture, vernacular architecture that I'm going to put on this small farm. Sometimes it would be there's a mention, my friend Jimmy Thomas up here, maybe was the first person to introduce me to the rich Lebanese community in the state. And sometimes that would only end up, it would start as a half a page or something and go to a paragraph, maybe even it might just be a sentence, but that needed to be woven in there. It was just astounding to learn these things. So it really was this cumulative process, learning about, you know, there's a through line of Gilbert Mason in here, the civil rights sort of icon from Biloxi, who I think 1955, again, historians help me, I'm an asterisk, but the first ever sort of direct action protest in the state. So that had to come in. So it really was this series of wonderful things that I was able to glean, tiny things that I hope made it authentic, types of sticks that people use to hunt rabbits. Tap sticks is what they're called. The way that some people might put peanut vines on their roof, on their tin roof, to dry them out, because when times got tough, that was a good way to feed cattle. The egg trade, things like, you know, there are a lot of things like that just I kept wanting to weave in, and it was often to the detriment of a plot moving forward, but it really was an extraordinary challenge and a gift to be able to receive that information. So yeah, I got to learn the whole time, which was outstanding.
All right, and we have these other editors of the Mississippi Encyclopedia in the room, so the Mississippi knowledge is massive in the Zoom room right here. They'll know everything. Let's see. Ted says, congratulations, Gilbert Mason's weighed-in was 1959.
Okay. All right. Getting there, getting close. Asterisk, take this way. Yeah, that's why it's good to have people who know and help me along the way. It's like one big accumulation of help and assistance. I will say a couple of things. Funny, I was speaking to my father the other day, who's reading this, and he played in the 60s junior varsity for Bear Bryant at the University of Alabama. And he was astounded because there's one line in this book about a person who was going to be recruited in the year 1978, and looking up what type of offense Bear Bryant was running in 1978, because he had shifted to the wishbone, so that I could make this recruit somebody who was familiar with the wishbone formation. Like, that's the kind of thing that I love doing, but that it's probably exhausting in a way, but I think that those sort of facts, or again, even going back to small pieces of architecture, the ways that we spoke about the town, just bringing those things in and hoping that they accumulate. But yeah, my dad, so I don't know about this other stuff, but yeah, man, he ran the wishbone in 78. That's pretty, you know, so it was a lot of fun looking that stuff up and trying to seamlessly, hopefully, work it in there.
Okay, so tell us, you're currently the writer in residence at Vanderbilt in the Department of Health and Medicine and Society. Am I right there?
Society. Yes.
And I don't know what any of that means.
That's
so what are you doing, and is that influencing work going forward?
Absolutely, and really, it's it influences my work going forward, but it also sort of lets me bring to bear so much of what I learned at the Center and on the Encyclopedia. The department, similar to the Center for the Study of Southern Culture, it's interdisciplinary, sociologists and anthropologists and a couple of writers. Carolyn Randall Williams is there, who did her MFA and lived in Oxford for a while. Obviously medical folks. There are hard scientists, and then there are those of us who are in the humanities side, and basically we look at bodies, we look at health and well-being. Often a big focus for us has been the relationship of intersections of race, class, ethnicity, sexuality, gender, and how populations, unfortunately, as is all too clear at the moment, I mean, how different populations how social determinants may or may not shape how they get to live, or how healthy they may or may not be. So in a way, because so much of my work has to do with whether it's veteran bodies or whether it's notions of class or race or these intersections and how we shape each other, these identities sort of shape and push on each other. That's what part of what I bring to the table there. The other thing is that my students, who are extraordinary, we're recording this, I shouldn't say it, they're far smarter than I am, but they don't often read literature critically, and they're not often thinking in that way about those texts. So the idea, for instance, to spend weeks poring over a Toni Morrison novel, the philosophy is that makes them better physicians, better critical thinkers. It helps them to care about people, and not just because they're really amazing at memorizing certain symptoms, and this asks them to develop a sort of new dialogue with people, with thinking, with how to think, about who we are and really some complex issues. So it too has been a delight. I mean, it's really been amazing to see how many colleagues I've made and how much I've learned from them and how I get to try and pull this off.
All right, that's great. And so are you working on anything new?
I'm working on a couple of novels. I'm working on a bunch of stories. But really it's sort of early in the process, and it's interesting because it is some of the Southern stuff is now carrying into health a bit more, and notions of how bodies, how health impacts who we are and where we're going, but it's really early, and all I know is I need to figure out how to tell a straightforward story, and that's the hardest challenge. That's the next challenge, is just go A to B and really just have punch above my weight again in terms of how I want to retell a story. So I'm always working on something, but that's a lot. I should just say, not quite yet.
Well, thank you so much, Odie, for joining us, and thanks everybody. The novel Some Go Home, and we have it at squarebooks.com, lovely book plate edition, and with a genuine Odie Lindsey signature there. And we also have our other virtual events posted there. And so we hope to see you soon, Odie. Business or pleasure, it's always a pleasure. Right. So hopefully you can come back to Square Books in Oxford soon, and we'll all be released for this, and we'll celebrate for reals next time. But thanks so much for joining us, and thank you all for joining us.
I'm just grateful to y'all. Thank you again. And yeah, someday you won't be able to get rid of me. I'm just going to install myself there. And until then, everybody hold fast and be well. And thank you so much.